Welcome to Branches and Roots, CNY Pagan Conversations. Produced by Church of the Greenwood, this is an educational and casual live recorded podcast that uplifts voices in the Central New York spiritual community. I'm your host, Emma Martins, and today's guest is my fellow Greenwood board member, Kurt Hohmann. Reverend Kurt Hohmann is a versatile practitioner comfortable in multiple spiritual traditions. His path has woven through his Lutheran roots, Jewish storytelling traditions, Gardnerian Wicca, and now Norse and Germanic heathenry. With nearly 3 decades of experience, he has drummed in voodoo temples, sung with Druids, completed a 4-day vision quest, and now serves as active clergy, providing spiritual services and deepening his understanding of spiritual topics. With his wide background, Kurt brings a rich, nuanced perspective to our understanding of paganism and spirituality. Thank you for joining me, Kurt.
Thank you for having me, Emma. It's good to be here.
Yeah, like I said before we had to redo all this, you have been an easy guest to catch. So I'm glad to be kicking off this series with you and kind of digging into a little bit more, not only about your history, but the CNY Pagan community as a whole, because you've been a part of it for quite a while through CNY Pagan Pride Day and some of your other ventures. And so I'm really curious to know, how has the scene shifted over the years since you first started getting involved?
My timing on getting involved originally, it was kind of fortuitous because I started looking into paganism back in the early 90s, right around the time that a little something called the World Wide Web was being born. And because this is kind of the dawn of the internet, it gave me the capability of going in and doing a little bit of research, joining news groups, and just kind of comparing notes with people all over the world that prior to me really hadn't been that big of a thing. I think it was a lot more secretive before I got involved. It has only mushroomed from there. Obviously, we've come into a huge information era, and there is more material than I know what to do with anymore. I think back in the early 90s, everybody was reading Margot Adler's Drawing Down the Moon and saying, oh, this is everything that's going on. And it seems almost an anachronism to go back and look at the book now. Uh, Over the past 30 years, my introduction to paganism in a lot of ways was getting invited first into a Wiccan study group that kind of morphed into a coven structure and learning directly from a high priestess. This was at one time the only way that you could really get involved. And since that time, the idea of being a soul practitioner has really mushroomed. The idea of being able to kind of stretch beyond the bounds of things that were written by people like Gerald Gardner has also taken off. Some of the things that I have seen over that period of time, I feel like I really got an education when I was involved with working with college students for a number of years. I was raised in a pagan path that said there are certain roles that males will take, there are certain roles that females will take, and you get into this whole great right structure that happens in Wicca that even extends to things like the maypole. Gee, if we're putting up a maypole, only the guys can touch it. If we're burning a maypole, only the women can touch it. And I had college students asking me questions like, why? And I scratched my head and said, I don't have a clue. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we started to get away from some of those very strict gender roles over the past 30 years. That's a wonderful thing. Um, a little bit harder subject to delve into is when I first got involved with paganism. I think that a lot of the people involved at the time, a lot of the teachers, had come up through the 60s and the 70s, and some of that Woodstock mentality was still out there. There was the whole free love and sexual expression, stuff like that. The other thing that I learned from my college students was the importance of things like consent, which the first time I went to a pagan festival, I remember distinctly there was a guy who was just walking up to people and hugging them randomly. And at the time, we were like, oh, this is wonderful. This is great. I would never do that today because I know that not everybody likes to be hugged. Things like that have really grown up with the movement, I think, over the past 2, 3 decades. And I think that a lot of young people and a lot of people getting involved now are a lot more aware of some of the danger signs of working with a leader that is a little bit too charismatic and a little bit too involved. And yeah, setting up personal boundaries, things like that are very, very important in any spiritual path. In the early days, it felt a little too much like, hey, anything goes. And that may be true on your personal spirituality, but it's not something that we should have to do in a group situation anymore. And I for one am very happy to see those kinds of changes that have come down.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight on like so many levels you touched there. And I feel like in a way they all like intertwine too, because you mentioned youth being such like a big shifter and changer with this movement. And you also mentioned a lot of what you kind of stepped into was formed by the 60s and 70s and that wave of the free love and stuff. But also at the same time, the people who were creating that change were also in their youth at the time. So it seems like the youth kind of like pushed the boundaries, but then that also couples with the rise of information and the internet. And now we have a whole new uh, way to learn not only about these sectors and about different ways of living, but also, like you said, like how to set up boundaries and how to be aware of certain personality types and things that maybe aren't okay anymore. So it's this really interesting, kind of like informed set of people that we're coming into, but also with so many voices being amplified, it can kind of be hard to tell like who do you listen to or how do you cut through the noise like that. So I was just wondering, as you think about how open we are now, you mentioned some of the things that you really enjoyed from it. Are there maybe some like guidelines or some pieces of advice you would give to people who are new to exploring paganism?
Um, a couple of things actually for people that are just coming into a pagan experience. The first thing I would really, really recommend is take your time. There are absolutely degrees that can be earned. I mean, within Wicca, there are, at least 3 degrees. Some traditions may have more than that. It's not a race. It's not, gee, I just got involved in this and I must become third degree after 3, 4 months. That's not. Spirituality should not be a race, and it should be something that you approach on an individual basis. Religion is something I've always thought that tries to get people to conform to a particular set of values, morals, and practices. Spirituality is a lot more personal. And if you are doing some basic Wiccan training, good for you. If it doesn't resonate with you, start looking at other possibilities, start looking at other things because we've got a lot more variety today. We've got a lot more available to us today. And, for me, starting out, I got into, like a lot of us, we read a lot of Celtic mythology when I first started with a study group. I don't have a strong affinity for it. It does not resonate with me. It does for a lot of people. I won't put it down, but it's not for me. I didn't really find something till I started reading some of the Old Norse stories, and I'm into the sagas and the Eddas, and I'm like, some of these stories I know, and I don't know why I know them. Others of them, I'm reading through them and going, oh yeah, that feels right. So that's been kind of the path that I've taken. Have I achieved all of the upper degrees in Wicca? No, but I don't feel like I've missed anything either. And that would be my advice to somebody starting out. Don't feel like you have to get your PhD in this one branch of paganism, because you really need to explore a little bit and find what might fit you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm someone who's very much on my journey as well. And I think when you first start out, you want to fit in somewhere, so it's natural to kind of dig into a specific community. But the exploration part is so key. And it kind of leads me to like two questions. The first being paganism as a topic is so broad, it's really an umbrella term. And I'm just wondering, if somebody asked you, oh, like, what is paganism? How would you define that?
For me, my roots in paganism come from a very strong connection to the natural world. I have always felt a strong affinity to nature. What makes me call myself pagan back in the early 90s is the realization that I'm not alone in thinking that sort of thing. As I'm reading more, I'm seeing that there are other people who, like me, got to a certain point where they looked at other people coming out of a church and saw that something had touched these people. Something wonderful had happened. There was a resonance. There was a kind of a spiritual joy that went with it. I never got that in church. A lot of us never got that in church. I get that if I am on the beach. I get that if I am at the top of a mountain watching the sunrise. I get that if I am out in the woods. I absolutely get that when there's a thunderstorm and this idiot is out in a field being the tallest thing around with my arms high in the air going, yes, and just
Well,
feeling the power of that storm, that kind of connection, that realization that I am a part of nature and nature is a part of me. To me, that's what makes me pagan.
yeah, the kind of like the thrill of being in the wider system that we all live in. I really like that answer, and I think kind of like I feel like you kind of bristled on this point a little bit, but kind of circling back for someone who is new, to me, it sounds like your belief is you don't necessarily have to be of a certain ranking or have a certain time under your belt to call yourself a pagan. Is that how you feel?
Absolutely. Recently I'm on the social network that nobody else uses, namely Mastodon. And we got into a discussion over there one day where, somebody had posed a question about witchcraft, and a lot of people jumped into the conversation and said, well, I'd like to call myself a witch, but I'm really not qualified. And those of us who were a little more experienced went back on that question and said, well, what do you think is going to qualify you? Well, I haven't done A, B, and C. The problem that we face sometimes, and this is paganism, this is Wicca, this is things that, other subjects that go far outside of any kind of spirituality, is there are certain individuals out there who will set themselves up as gatekeepers. You can't call yourself XYZ until you have passed my, 20-part course at $100 per session, etc. That sort of thing is a little too prevalent. Um, Personally, I think if you call yourself a witch, you're a witch. Why would I disagree with you? What do I have in me that I can look at you and go, no, no, that's not valid?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point because I mean, one, if we all try to like agree on the same definition, it's never going to happen. So
Yeah.
that being said, it's not like a strict regimented thing to begin with. And of course, there's, you know, nothing wrong with somebody offering guidance to help develop one's skills, but I do think that there is a little bit too much hesitation for folks to really own that title. And I think part of it comes from media, and often witchcraft and these kind of things are shown as either being something that like is a gift or is like bestowed upon you, or like, you know, you drink like some wrong potion and then they wake up the next morning and they have powers,
Mm.
or it's like the Harry Potter, you get a letter when you're 11. Like there's some big initiation moment that happens to characters that we see in media that we might not necessarily see or feel ourselves. But I don't think you need the initiation to be part of this community and to explore and to take on that title if it's what resonates with you.
I'd like to just add on to that a little bit. No disagreement with any of that. However, there are certain cases where, for example, I cannot call myself a third degree Gardnerian. There is a
Mhm.
set of things that must be accomplished before you can apply certain labels to yourself.
Mhm. Mhm.
But generic titles, are you a witch? Are you a druid? Are you a pagan? If you say you are, you are.
Yeah, that's a really great distinction to make because I feel like, you know, you mentioned gatekeeping earlier, and it gatekeeping has its time and its place. And I think that's like one of the areas where it's like if there is an order or a history or some sort of process to claiming a title or a right or something of that nature, then it certainly needs to be respected. And also, as we, as pagans, become a little bit more open, connect a little bit more online and in community, it is important too to determine, you know, who do you actually want in your circle. Because while, you know, openness is good until, you know, maybe some bad seeds get into the mix. And then, so yeah, I'm just curious as to like what your thoughts are on gatekeeping in general within like the pagan spheres.
Once again, if I want to achieve a certain degree within a certain program, then yeah, I I cannot call myself an Alexandrian witch without going through the training that goes into the Alexandrian program. To do that, I have to find somebody who is a qualified teacher. I probably picked a bad one because I don't know that much about the Alexandrians. In Gardnerian, that would be the third degree. Third degree means that you are capable not only of training, but of elevating somebody to those different levels then. And that's entirely fine. But if you're setting yourself up in terms of, I will make you a shaman if you come and spend a weekend at a Holiday Inn and take all my classes, you know, then you can have this title. That feels a little bit more like the kind of gatekeeping that I would try to avoid. That's a little bit more of that's a scam. That's and in some cases it almost starts to feel like an MLM.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Come and take my shamanic class, and then you can bring people in under you. And yeah, man.
Yeah, that's like a wider trend we see with any type of like online coaching or courses. You know, it's one thing to master the information, but then it's another thing to then take what you learned and then sell it off down the
Hmm.
line to, you know, it's an interesting, it's a very fine line, you know, just like you mentioned too, like with the courses and stuff, like there's a lot of vetting that
Oh
has to
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
And so like when you think of like vetting in the spiritual community, like what are some like kind of checklist things that you encourage people to maybe look into as they are maybe exploring these different paths? Like what are some good pointers just to keep in mind as you're kind of figuring out if someone's worth their salt, or if somebody, or if like a community is like worth actually stepping into?
Um, it's kind of a back and forth. You step into a community, you start working with a teacher, much the same way that you would pick a contractor to work on your house or decide if you want to play on this particular volleyball team. I mean, it's to some degree, it is about a particular teacher. You want to ask a wider community. You want to find people who have worked with that teacher. And I think a teacher who is at all worthwhile would be more than willing to share a little bit of that information, although obviously be cautious because they're not about to send you to the person that goes, wow, they're terrible.
Hmm.
But finding a trustworthy community is sometimes one of the biggest challenges, and at the same time, it is potentially the most rewarding because you can get the kind of feedback then that you need in order to pick a leader to work with, to pick a teacher to work with. There is some degree of experimentation too. You probably need to meet that particular teacher and see if you have any kind of rapport, because if you're at each other's throats right off the bat, it's probably not going to work out. Um, I will say that one of my teachers many, many years ago expressed to me that everyone that I meet in life is a teacher, and a good percentage of them have no idea what it is they are teaching me. And boy, is that true. And I have learned things from teachers that they had set out to teach me. I have learned many things from others that they had no idea they were passing along. And which lessons are more valuable?
Yeah, yeah, I think it all kind of circles back to what you said in the beginning of, this isn't a race. It's not something that you need to kind of complete within a certain time span. It's really a relationship that you
Yeah.
develop with yourself, and it's knowing what you need from spirituality in that moment, to maybe help guide the vetting process and figure out what communities work best for you and what you actually like from a teacher. And sometimes you might get it wrong, but everything's a teacher, like you just mentioned. So you take your lessons and you move with it. And kind of like circling back, you mentioned Mastodon earlier. Where are places where you find spiritual community online, or just in a way that's accessible for people to tap into?
You can probably find those sorts of things in pretty much any of the social media sites. I mean, there's a ton of people connected to Facebook. It's not my favorite social media site, but if you go on there and you start searching for things, like pagans in city I live in, things like that, you're probably going to come up with a few hits. And from there, you've got the opportunity to go out and look at pages that these people have done. You've got the opportunity to go out and maybe kind of lurk a little bit on some of those individuals and see what it is they're about. We uh, we just had something come up. I think this was just yesterday, where somebody's like, in our heathen kindred, came up and said, I've been receiving these emails from such and such a group. Does anybody know anything about them? And here's where the power of community comes in, because three or four of us jumped in, looked around, found a little history, and said, you know what? This particular person got kicked out of a lot of things 10 years ago because she was making some really racially charged comments. I don't know if this is somebody that you want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the joys of the internet is nothing ever gets completely deleted.
Right, yeah, especially when, there's folks like you who have been around for a while, you remember and you bookmark certain things. And um yeah, like just like that kind of vetting moment that you just mentioned, and kind of relating back to what we're talking about, is asking a trusted group of people. And I've even done this too as I kind of enter the scene, is, what about so and so, or maybe who should I not talk to about XYZ thing, or what's their deal. There's some times where it can feel a little bit like gossip and drama, and so you have to sort of key in and know when it's that element of things versus when it's just being informed about someone's history. Um,
Absolutely.
and so it seems like you're in a lot of different intersections of spirituality through your work with like the kindred and the church and the clergy that you do with the universalist churches. And I'm just curious as to like, how have you seen this like paganism sort of as a root intersecting with these other faiths and traditions or intertwining with that?
I honestly wasn't sure how it was going to work out. It's actually my 5-year anniversary just passed a couple of weeks ago of the first time that I was invited to come and essentially deliver the sermon at a Unitarian Universalist church. And I remember that first time thinking, I have no idea what these people believe, how I'm going to be received, what I'm gonna, and I talked to the minister at the time and said, what do I need to know about this? And her advice back to me was, we seek speakers of a variety of different faiths, a variety of different places, and universalism has a lot to do with seeking universal truths. I think that that is where I have wound up. This is kind of a niche that I've fallen into. Invariably, I can now tie a pagan theme to a Unitarian Universalist one pretty darn quickly. They're not that far apart because there is an acceptance of a variety of different individual beliefs and more a sense of, but the community can come together and work together, even though this might be a little different from what we're accustomed to. I would not claim that I could walk into a typical, just to pick an example, I don't think I'd be welcome to deliver a sermon at a Catholic church. I don't think I'd be welcome at the Southern Baptist Church. But for if we really sat down and started to look at some of the things that we have in common, I think they might be surprised at how many there actually are. Yeah, there's going to be differences. Yeah, there's going to be some real spiritual discussions, but from the tiny bit of background that I have with the Jewish faith and having sat in on sessions where they are discussing the Torah, it feels so refreshing to be in a room full of people who are arguing about particular topics of spirituality, who can leave at the end of the day and still not be convinced of the other guy's opinion, but damn it, we're a community and we work together. And even though we differ on this, we have this much other stuff in common.
It sounds like it's more of, like you said, like the universal type of truths and individual beliefs, but what really differentiates these different sectors is the application of
Mhm.
them. Would you say that's kind of how you feel?
Yeah, yeah, I think it is. And as it is for a lot of people, it has bothered me my entire life how many people have had to perish in fights and war and other things because my God has a different name than your God. They asked
Yeah,
us to
and
do exactly the same things, but
yeah, but different names, different application. And even
yeah.
when you mention like mysticism and you mentioned the Catholic Church, but if you go back through a couple hundred years ago, there was a lot of mysticism involved in the Catholic Church and in the ceremonies that they seem to not want to acknowledge
Mhm.
now. So it's interesting when you actually look at, like I said, universal truths and just even just the history of some of these organizations, how we're really not that different or far apart as people might want it to
Exactly.
seem. Yeah. I was going to ask another question regarding that topic. Oh, there are like you said, you found a comfortable space within the Universalist, or at least the local Universalist chapters, in terms of showing up as a pagan.
Mhm.
But there still are like open spaces that aren't open to paganism? Is this something that you've noticed still being prevalent?
Can, can you
Yeah, I can
expand on that a little bit?
I was actually and I don't think it might be in our local scene. I was talking to a friend of mine recently who she does a lot of like wildlife rehabilitation and works a lot in that scene. And so, nature-based places tend to draw in a pagan crowd. And I think there was like some sort of outreach, I want to say maybe in like Chicago or something, that was sort of like a multi-faith based type of organization, but yet like the paganism was too far for them
Hmm.
to accept. So it sounds like that's not really something you've come across in the CNY area of being not comfortable, other than the obvious spaces of a Catholic church and these very specific dioceses. But it seems like places that are welcome to all faiths in the CNY area tend to be welcome to all faiths.
That has been my experience, and it's been a number of years since I've had anything to do with the Interfaith Council here in the Syracuse area. But I recall when I did visit that my opinion was quite welcomed at the time, that they were actually quite interested to hear what somebody within the pagan community would have to say and be able to draw those kinds of comparisons with the other faiths that are more regularly represented there.
Yeah, that's really good to hear that. And I feel like that's just kind of what this area offers in general is a kind of interconnectedness. I mean, we see that, or at least I've seen it at the past couple of pagan pride days that we've had, where we've had people of maybe slightly different faiths still showing up in support or curiosity of what we're doing. And so it seems like the CNY area is supportive of all these different paths and avenues. Um, has
It,
that shifted over the years too?
I have not seen a lot of repression in this area. I've heard about it from people who live in other parts of the country or people who live in other countries entirely, that it's certainly a bigger thing in Alabama and
Mm.
Mississippi than it is here in, dark blue New York State. But not to say that it's not a thing, but it has not been a prevalent thing. It has not been something that we've run into where somebody was really seriously trying to shut us down. I mean, even our local Pagan Pride Day, there have been a number of years where we have had people who came out and protested, but the numbers and the type of protest have been so small and so limited as to almost insignificant. There was one fellow who used to come down with his daughter, and they would carry a couple of signs around, and that was the extent of it. That was, yeah. And in fact, we'd go out and offer them water because they happened to do it on a couple of days that were extremely hot, and they didn't want to take any water. It was like, we're not cursing the water, just you look really thirsty.
Yeah,
It's
this
just not
bottle's
who
still
we are.
sealed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
sealed bottle of water, man.
yeah.
You
Straight from Costco, no worries. Yeah. Obviously there's going to be bigotry and pushback just in general, because that's the way humans are. But yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like it's really a theme here, which is nice to know, especially for anybody who's curious about getting into the scene. That's typically not something you have to worry about on like a large scale. Um, and so looking at the scene as a whole, how do you want to see the CNY pagan community kind of like grow within the next years? Like, what do you sort of want to see come in to our circles?
I I I I think that a lot of the more open events, a lot of the more open groups, things like that, um, like so many other communities, so many other things, 2020 kind of put a kibosh on so many things. And we're just now starting to see some rebirth of that. I hope to see more face-to-face communities coming along. At the same time, I don't want to see those face-to-face communities grow at in such a way that they are exclusive to those people who are just a little bit too far out. And I think that we've discovered a lot since 2020 about how a hybrid organization can work, how we can do a little bit more outreach and pull people into a community, even if they're, a 2-hour drive away, which, let's face it, that's too far to go for a meeting that's going to last an hour or two.
Hmm. Yeah. And as part of your kindred, I would love to hear how you've kind of approached that community, and how you sort of, not you specifically, but you as the kindred has kind of considered these challenges and tried to make it as open as possible. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about how you're set up and what you're all about?
We are, first of all, it's Utetlenko Kindred, which we were actually born in the back of a shop in the city of Oswego. And the name means outpouring in Icelandic. Oswego is the Podnanchi word for outpouring. It's the river outpours into the lake. So, we just kind of followed that and decided to keep that as part of our background. What we have done, and again, we're growing slowly again ever since 2020, but we are back at the point now where we are holding a couple of meetings every month, wide open to the public, a face-to-face meeting. We actually get together with other people, and then a virtual meeting. And it's usually at the virtual meeting that we get into the deeper discussion. Somebody puts a presentation together. We all talk about it. We all get, we give that opportunity for both kinds. Some people really don't like to do virtual space. I get that. Some people really can't make it for face-to-face space. I get that too. And we're trying to accommodate both of those and put a cohesive group together. So we've got a leadership council that is those of us who are kind of the primary driving members of it, but we've got other people who come and join us. And if we're getting together face to face, maybe we share a meal. If we're getting together virtually, we can't share a meal, but we can share a lot of ideas. And to tell the truth, in virtual space, most of the people there are usually eating because it always winds up around dinner time. So it's a little like sharing a meal.
Yeah, yeah, that's really nice. That's one thing the virtual thing is really flexible about is you can kind of do whatever, in
Yeah.
your own space. So what are some of the topics that the Kindred discusses in your meetings?
We uh, we just had a meeting last night, and the topic of discussion was the well-known paradox of tolerance. And the idea that what are we as a group going to tolerate? Heathenry has had a Nazi problem for some time. There are certain extreme right-wing types who have taken a lot of the symbolism and a lot of the culture that goes along with heathenism and tried to make it their own. And a lot of that is pulling back from that. The paradox of tolerance, of course, is the idea that if we tolerate intolerant behavior, the intolerant behavior wins. And eventually, nobody's allowed to do anything anymore because intolerance will dominate. And so the nature of our discussion was, what can we do about this? We know that this is a thing. We know what we can what we can and cannot do. So how do we avoid this? If we get somebody who shows up at a meeting who is obviously not a good fit, how are we going to react to that? And this is the kind of discussion we got into yesterday. Other times we have gotten into discussions about particular deities or particular archaeological finds of practices that might have been going on 2, 3, 10,000 years ago. So it's kind of all over the place. But given the current political situation in the country, the tolerance one seemed like a very apt topic for this month.
Yeah, I love that. And I see your next monthly meeting is on December 14th at 2
Mhm.
p.m. Um, these are posted by Cheyenne in the Within the Greenwood group. And then the Kindred also has its own Facebook group as well. That's open for anyone to join after you answer your little questionnaires. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. And honestly, our little questionnaire is usually enough that we don't have too many problems with the kind of people I just described trying to get
Yeah.
in. I mean, it's basically, if you're coming at us with a white supremacist attitude, we are not your group.
Yeah, and this is, we talked earlier about gatekeeping, this is a time where you want to use
Yeah,
gatekeeping
good point.
because
Good
you're
point.
trying to protect the integrity of the community that you're creating. You're not trying to be necessarily exclusionary, but yeah, at the same time, again, with the tolerance thing that you just mentioned, yeah, that's very interesting. And so the kindred kind of centers around heathenry. What exactly is heathenry for those who might not be familiar?
Heathenry is a subset of paganism, which is primarily based on um, practices and deities and spirits of Northern and Central Europe. And when I say that, I'm referring to the Germanic countries, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries. So all of the things that Marvel Comics took and stole away with Thor and Odin and Sif and all those characters. Yes, we have the original versions of those, and we all like Marvel movies too, but we don't conflate the two.
Right, yeah. I feel like that could be said about a lot of the mystic and spiritual and pagan topics that end up in widespread media,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not exactly on par with the source material. But it
Mm-mm.
sounds like the kindred's a really good first step for anybody who maybe doesn't know what path they want to be on, or wants to learn a little bit more about that specific area. So I would certainly encourage anybody who's kind of exploring their paganism right now, or maybe just wants to try something new, or maybe doesn't consider themselves a heathen, but would like to be part of discussions like these. I'm sure the kindred would be more than welcoming to joining them. And so the next monthly moo is on Saturday, December 14th at 2 p.m. And it's held at Blue Moon Apothecary and Wellness Center in Liverpool, New York. You can find more details about that through their Facebook group or within the Greenwood, both of which are linked on the Greenwood's Facebook page. So if you need to find those links, I'll probably leave them in some sort of description if I can do that. But thank you so much, Kurt, for being here and getting into all this. This has been a really great discussion to have. I feel like we've danced across a lot of topics,
Oh,
but
yeah.
but they still somehow circled all back into each other, which I feel is very uh, I don't even know what the right word is, but it kind of fits fits the theme and fits what I feel like paganism is this intertwining of beliefs. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any last remarks that you'd like to leave?
Um, yeah, I have just a little story.
Sure.
And you mentioned at the beginning in my introduction that 4-day vision quest. Well, one of the things that I wanted to do at that quest was kind of give myself a little bit better spiritual direction. I had had some Wiccan training. I had hung out with druids. I had done the voodoo temples, blah, blah, blah. I had done all those different things. And there I am in my quest circle, and I kind of threw it out to the universe. Which way am I supposed to be going? What which God am I supposed to be working with? And as I was laying there in that quest circle, I looked up in the sky and I saw what looked like a face forming in a cloud. I said, okay, this could be interesting. And it morphed into another face. And then as I watched, more and more faces were emerging all over the sky. And the next thing I knew, it looked like there were thousands of faces looking down on me. And in that moment, it kind of struck me that whatever your version of deity is, it's got 1,000 faces, it's got 1,000 different names, and they're all valid.
Yeah, that's such a good pointer that, it can show up looking the same or looking different or shifting over time or whatever have you. But as long as it feels resonant within who you are, that's really what matters.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for leaving us with that. And I think that concludes today's episode of Branches and Roots. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to follow Church of the Greenwood on Facebook, as well as hop into our private Facebook community within the Greenwood, where you will see the first chance to watch any of these episodes will be live in that group. And also, it's a great way to build community within the CNY area. So if you have any of those questions or you want to connect more with folks who are local to you, that is a great resource to do so. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.